Welcome to the Trey Gowdy Podcast, and thank you for spending Tuesdays with me. I decided to start the podcast with a virtue, a trait that I think is really important in life, and it's really important in our culture, and that's fairness. And it's hard to talk about fairness in one podcast, so I have broken it into three. I hope that you will listen to all three, and more importantly, I hope that you will provide some feedback and tell me how you define fairness, where you rank it in the list of attributes that we need in our culture, and what we can do to facilitate more of it in public discourse and in how we treat one another. And then we'll talk about how insidious both the reality and the perception of unfairness can be. In other words, not just what fairness is and why we value it, but what effect does unfairness have on the recipient? And then that will lead to our third conversation, which is, how do we objectively test, judge, or calibrate fairness? Who is the arbiter of what is fair and what is not fair? But for now, at least, let's just focus on fairness and the words we associate with fairness, like justice and beauty and equality and even-handedness. Those are all words we would assign merit to. They're aspirational words. They're concepts to be sought, to be pursued, to be nurtured, to be perfected. But what do they mean? Does it matter whether we can define them or not? Is it enough that we have our own definitions of them, or does there need to be some objective definition and test capable of being universally applied? Are those concepts of fairness and justice and equality and beauty and even-handedness, are they distinct, or are they hopelessly intertwined? And before you conclude that it's okay for each of us to have our own definitions of fairness, is it really? Do you really mean that? Do you really believe that? How can I judge my fairness towards you or your fairness towards me if we're applying distinct definitions and attributes to the process? Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? I think that was Snow White or Cinderella or Medea or some other show my sisters watched a lot. I just know I heard it a lot and paid absolutely no attention to it until recently. Fairest one of all. I don't think she was asking who is the most impartial one of all, who would make the best judge or Supreme Court justice. She was asking who was the most beautiful. But there's the word, fair. You may think she was asking about who was lighter or paler or blonder, and you probably are right. But I think the words fairness and beauty and justice and equality are hopelessly intertwined. I think they are completely interconnected. And when you see fairness in action, it is beautiful. It has this radiant symmetry to it, this eternal evenness to it. I even love the spoken and written word fair. It has a beautiful sound and a beautiful look. What about us as a culture, as a country? Do we like fairness when we see it? Someone who is willing to call it as he or she sees it, regardless of the crowd reaction, that neutral, detached arbiter? The person who treats friend and foe alike with due process and equality in both intent and result? Nearly everyone would laud fairness as an attribute, as a positive, something to be aspired to and clung to and administered. But what if you had to define it? What does it mean? I mean, we've all heard variations of the theme. You're not being fair. You're treating me unfairly. All I want is to be treated with some fairness. But what does the word mean? Does it mean equally? Is fairness tantamount to equality, that we should treat similarly situated people similarly? Probably. That's a good beginning definition, until we run into the inevitable problem that finding distinguishing facts or circumstances really isn't that hard. So are two people ever really completely similarly situated? Man, I want you to assume two people are scheduled for an 8 a.m. job interview at a local coffee shop with a putative employer, and they're both late for the interview. I'm not an employment counselor, but I'm pretty sure showing up for a job interview late isn't good. Candidate one prepared for the interview, went to bed on time, set one alarm for 6 a.m. and another for 6:10 a.m. as a backup. But a thunderstorm comes through and knocks the power off. So for a second, the electronic clock resets to 12. But this candidate one, was so well prepared, she set a battery alarm back up. So there'd be no problem, except a roommate changed the batteries and a video game remote and put the dead batteries back where the good ones were supposed to go. So the backup alarm didn't work either. She missed the interview. Candidate 2 got drunk watching Narcos and fell asleep on the couch without setting any alarms. He was late. They're both late. There's no question about it. Are they late for the same reason? Depends on what you say the reason is. Are they late because they were not on time? And that's a pretty good definition of late. Sure, but there's another way of looking at it. One candidate did everything we would want a conscientious employee to do, and the other did not. Would you treat them the same? Would you be even in your treatment of them being late? Yes, we want to treat people the same. That is fairness. But good luck finding identical fact patterns where you could actually do that. I'm Trey Gowdy, and we'll have more coming up. So again, what does it mean to be fair? Is it even-handed? Is it that you get to do what I get to do? Well, the criminal justice system is designed to produce a fair result, but it certainly is not even-handed. One party has the burden of proof, the other does not. One party may get more jury strikes than the other party gets. One party has appellate rights, the other does not have. One party gets to go last in closing argument, which is considered a big advantage. So the goal is fairness, but the process is not even-handed. Is fairness balance? I wish I had a nickel for every reporter who told me they thought their story was fair, even though I did not think their story was fair. And the word they would almost invariably use was balanced, that their story was balanced, that somehow balance is tantamount to fairness. Well, it can't be, can it? Because one person may utter a totally false statement and another person utters the opposite false statement. The story is balanced. You have accurately quoted two wrong people. I don't know anyone who considers that to be fair. It's balanced for sure. You balance one misstatement with another misstatement. Great, you're balanced, but you're not fair. Is fairness accuracy? Well, that has to be part of it, but it has to be more than just simply being accurate. I remember Hurricane Dorian and the president tweeting that the storm might impact a handful of states, including Alabama. Okay, Alabama was not at risk. It's accurate to report the president included Alabama in his list of states. It's accurate to report Alabama was not at risk. But is it fair to leave out of your story the very important fact that he also included other states which actually were at risk? In other words, if the president warns residents of Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Alabama of a storm, is it fair to write a story belittling the president for including Alabama? Or is it fair to say the president was right on 3 and wrong on 1? So something can be accurate and still not fair until we as a society settle on a working definition of fairness that we can all subscribe to. Then that word will continue to be illusory, something we claim to care about, but not enough to actually define or apply to others, or most importantly, apply to ourselves. So do you value fairness? That's the question. Do you value fairness? Do you reward it even when it hurts your own position? Do we as a culture value it? Can we define it? To whom do we go if we are looking for a fair judgment, a fair outcome? I want you to think about it. I want you to let me know how you define fairness. And once we have a working definition for it, something we can all universally subscribe to, then I want us to talk about the second part of this trilogy, which is something each of us has witnessed and experienced and dealt with and lived through, which is that miserable, soul-changing experience of being treated unfairly and the insidious impact it has on us individually and has on groups that have been treated unfairly. Until next time, I want you to take care, and let's all try to define fairness, but even more importantly, try to put it in practice. Thank you for listening to the Trey Gowdy Podcast. I hope you continue to join me on Tuesdays, and please rate and review this podcast on Apple Podcasts or by going to foxnewspodcast.com. Let us know what you think. We want to hear from you. I'm Trey Gowdy with the Fox News Podcast Network.